So yeah, I just wanted to go ahead and kick this off. My name is Bruce. I'm helping kind of chair the session, but I want to introduce Trevor Laughlin, and he's going to be talking about SILC, the framework for assessing e-learning effectiveness under COVID-19. And I'm guessing it doesn't stand for Secure Internet Live Conferencing. So
No, it doesn't. No, it
yep. So
doesn't. And
I'll hand you the floor. Go for it.
well, thank you very much. Well, hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good wherever you are at the moment. My name is Trevor Laughlin, and I have been an ESL teacher for approximately 14 years, and I have been a student of e-learning for the past 3. I've just got my postgrad diploma, and when COVID hit, one of my colleagues, one of my fellow students and I decided that we wanted to take this head on, and we wanted to develop an assessment framework for evaluating e-learning during COVID-19. Now, we looked at a lot of things that were out there, and we're going to go through the whole process with you guys. But we wanted something that could be useful for the instructor or the course designer, the people who are in the trenches doing the work. Now, we were both working at the post-secondary level, so we really designed this for post-secondary level classes. Is this applicable to lower levels? Yes, but the lower your student age goes, in some senses, the less applicable it is. But there is certainly some value to be taken from it. Secondarily, we had an audience of curriculum directors and certainly students. And when I say students, I mean you should be putting these questions to your students in order to get their feedback on it. So what we're going to do right now is I'm basically going to outline the factors that we had to consider under COVID-19. And these are all done with research foundations underneath them. We'll look at some of the major existing models out there, consider our design considerations in relation to COVID-19, and then we'll show you what SILC is. So when March of last year hit, 2020, it was triage time. We ran to our computers and tried to migrate our classes online. And while we did the best we could, students have noticed a significant drop in the quality of learning compared to what they were receiving online. And sadly, despite the fact that we've had an entire summer to improve ourselves, or at least a summer at that time, and then we had the fall 2020 year and the winter 2021 year for online learning, they still haven't bought into online learning. And honestly, we haven't really done a very good job of presenting it. The listen and read model is not working, certainly not at the post-secondary level. And so it actually raised a couple of really interesting questions. And these questions actually go all the way back to when online learning was called distance learning. And what COVID did is it exacerbated some of the existing problems with it. So isolation and motivation, they're intertwined, and they're a very significant issue, particularly when students feel that they aren't reaching their professors or even their fellow students, which of course then dovetails into the idea of building communities of inquiry. Because one of the things that students are constantly complaining about the online learning scenario is that we don't have that social learning experience that we do in universities or colleges. And that's legit. Have we designed our online courses to accommodate for that? We also have to look at technology because, of course, we have to look at technology. And finally, there's going to be a little bit about assessment in there, but it's more about assessment redesign and how we assess their skills. So, believe it or not, someone has actually talked about this. For those of you not familiar with the Commonwealth of Learning, where have you been? The Commonwealth of Learning is 33 years old. It is founded in Canada, but it's an international organization of scholars devoted to providing advice for open learning and distance education. They've been around for 33 years. They're headquartered in Vancouver, BC in Canada, but they are worldwide. And they posted these COVID guidelines quite quickly. And these posted guidelines were for everyone from grade school to post-secondary. But they were fairly general and they covered a fairly large base. Ultimately, they kind of came out with 2 things. And while they didn't necessarily specify any particular pedagogy, they did mention that it should be student-centered and that 2-way communication was an incredibly important factor in there. So when we kind of distill everything offered in the Commonwealth of Learning's guidelines, it basically came down to 3 points. That whatever pedagogy we endorse is that it should be focusing on the pedagogical and socio-emotional needs of those students. Second, that there has to be a synchronous education component. And while they don't necessarily explicitly say synchronous, they keep mentioning technologies in there. Yes, things like telephones. Students should be able to call their universities or chat to their professors by a telephone, by, let's say, instant messaging during, let's say, specified hours. That's synchronous. And the final thing is that synchroneity should be used in conjunction with asynchronous offerings. So it's not an either or proposition, it's a blending of both. Now, other factors we have to consider. Well, I'm sure many of your students are not in your time zones and possibly not even in your country. How many students do you have that are from China that had problems accessing a Google document because of the firewall? Infrastructure is a real issue. Are you offering your courses synchronously with video streaming, or are you offering them asynchronously? Is this a possibility if your student is attending in Afghanistan? Is that a possibility if your student is attending in rural America? Because if the pandemic has taught us nothing, it's that parents have had to drive their children to the nearest McDonald's to get Wi-Fi to connect to their classes. That's an issue in America and in Canada too. Have we addressed this? Have your offerings addressed this? We've also found that synchronous components are essential. Now, if you've ever read the work of Rastinsky is a very, very prolific author when it comes down to synchronous learning and some of the values of online learning. Synchronicity and synchronous offerings build arousal, emotional arousal, and motivation in students. It also becomes a bridge to building community among students. And the final advantage of that is immediacy. By immediacy, I'm using that in the online learning term of how quickly feedback comes to the students. This is important, but asynchronicity is important as well, because students will be given large bodies of information that they can't immediately respond to. They need time to engage with it cognitively, to reflect on it, to make discussion board posts. This is where the asynchronous component is also important. So, what are the existing models out there and why aren't we using them? The short answer on that is none of them are exactly perfect, but there's value to them. So there are three models: the benchmarking toolkit, which is actually done by the Commonwealth of Learning; SITE, which is actually done by MIT; and Sections, which is done by Tony Bates. So we're going to start off with the benchmarking toolkit for technology and labeled learning, but because that's a mouthful, I'm just going to call it the benchmarking toolkit. So this was put out in 2018 by the Commonwealth of Learning, and it is very, very deep in what it offers. Everything from policy all the way down to organizational strategy, organizational culture. It covers things like content development. It covers things like documentation and policy, and even tell champions, technology enhanced learning champions. Are there people within your organization who are pushing to get new technology put into place? Is there policy that prevents them from doing so? This is the tool for you, sort of, maybe, but you'll see why not in a second. It is very, very detailed. You have a fillable PDF here, and you can fill in a score of 1 to 5. But after answering each of these questions, and there are several in several sections, you can provide rationale and evidence. This is a great document to collect information presented to HR or people in charge of making policy, because at the end of it, it even shows up on a, I believe, a web diagram or a web graph here. So you can see where your organizations are doing well and perhaps faring poorly. It's great, except it's 63 pages long. And from a teacher's perspective, from an educator's perspective, there is just too much policy, strategic plan, and organizational culture in there. It's things that we really don't have much control over. So not as helpful. The second one here is SITE, the Comprehensive Initiative on Technology Evaluation for Educational Technology Adoption and Implementation. This came out of MIT, and Osterwile, who was piloting this in India, had a very, very interesting look here. It really was right there in the classroom with you. It covers teacher, students, culture. It covers sustainability. And by sustainability, I am not referring to ecological, environmental issues. I'm pointing out whether the technology can be sustained in the system, in the school system. For example, this is rural India, in some places where it is very damp or very hot. Can the computers continue to function? Do they have solid internet connections if they're doing streaming? This is something to consider. And they also, this is the only one of the three frameworks that talks about pedagogy. And I'll bring forward this quote to you because this is very, very telling. So it is important to consider whether pedagogy, curriculum, and assessment were shifting in harmony with one another, or whether they were becoming too aligned with the technology. This is one of the constant dangers we face, that technology is driving our education, not that sound pedagogy is driving our technology choice. And this is where we have some problems with CITE. CITE is great though. You can look at some of these questions that you see here and you can find some very, very telling and insightful points. So for example, how does the technology fit with the current curriculum? Would the technology change the curriculum? These are questions that should be asked. Now, we have to understand that when we had to make the shift last year in March of 2020, we didn't have a chance to ask these questions. We just quickly did what we could to keep our students learning. But we've had over a year since then. Has anyone asked these questions and made changes based on them? No. And CITE is great. But the problem with CITE is CITE is a product evaluator. It's, here's the technology, will it work with what we have? But it's not telling us anything about our pedagogy. And is our pedagogy good? So again, kind of cart before the horse. Finally, we have sections. Now, sections was done by Bates and Sangra back in 2010. And if you do not know who Tony Bates is, you haven't really learned a lot about e-learning. Bates has been around since 2003. Many people in Canada consider him kind of the grandfather of e-learning. He has worked with UNESCO, the World Bank, the United States Higher Education Commissions, and several US universities. He's worked with the UK Open University, the Council of Ontario Universities. He has done a lot. And his book, Teaching in a Digital Age, is completely free to download online. He's a big advocate of open learning. Sections is great. It is very, very broad. And as you can see here, it covers a large array of things. Things like ease of use of the technology, things like networking, things that we haven't talked about yet, security and privacy. Now, is security and privacy something a teacher usually deals with? Well, it's an issue. Bates is great. And again, this is a question of technology driving pedagogy. And this is what sections does. It's there to analyze the technology. It's analyzing the means of delivery, but not what we are delivering. So again, we still don't have an assessment framework that works, but we do have some good guidance. So what we did is we took the benchmarking toolkit, we took CITE, and we took sections, and we analyzed that for, first of all, what is relevant to teachers? What is relevant to course designers, people in the trenches doing work right now? We amalgamated those common sections found in the toolkit, CITE, and in sections. We put them all in one document. We cross-referenced them to see that they're talking about the same thing. We amalgamated them. And then we eliminated the non-instructor portions that really couldn't be relevant to our discussion. And that's when we came up with the design for SILC. So as we were looking at these amalgamated sections, we could all basically lump it into 4 categories. We had student support, we had instructor support, we had the limitations of technology, and then we had our course design section. So what are in these sections? Well, student support has to deal with issues of loneliness and isolation. Are students engaging with the material? Are students being able to engage with their teachers? Are they able to engage across multiple channels? Are they able to engage with their fellow learners? Now, this could also be part of course design. Does your course have opportunities for students to interact and learn with other students? That's in the course design section, but that's still part of building community and engagement. And finally, we're talking about digital integration and immediacy. Can we put this across multiple devices? Do we have a quick level of feedback to students? And here's the point. Do students feel that they are being responded to quick enough? This is the important thing. For the instructor support, for us, yes, there is an issue of technological training. First of all, there's an issue of expertise. Who is teaching us? And this is an important thing. Many of us at this conference here are coming from, shall we say, a somewhat privileged background. We have people in our institutions who are educational technologists and educational designers who help us construct our courses. The advice they give us is very different from the advice an IT person who is competent in the technology can give us. The people with who are instructional designers can give us pedagogical training. And this is largely what we're missing. We know how to use Zoom. We know what all the buttons do, but we don't necessarily know how it fits in with our pedagogy. And then again, there are our TEL champions, those people within our organizations, within our departments that have said, hey, I found this great app called VoiceThread. I would love to get this into our classes. How are they treated? Are they the horse, the strong horse that gets the heaviest load, that their work just suddenly becomes burdensome because they're working? Are they being incentivized? These are things we have to ask. The limits of technology. Well, this is where we go back to those bandwidth questions. Can the students access our technology? Do the students have the technology to do our work? And of course, many of you saying, oh, I'm sure they do. However, and I will point out one very simple thing for myself. I am an ESL teacher, and one of the things I teach is essay writing. And I've had students who do not have laptops. Now, it's easy to write an essay on a desktop. It's easy to write an essay on a laptop. Many of my students are connecting via tablets or connecting via phones, which makes it very, very difficult for them to write an essay. Should I change my assignments? Should we provide them with technology? Interesting fact, one of my students right now, actually a large group of our students at Trent University, Canada, are from Panama. And we have had to find two students, or we've had to find laptops for two students in Panama and deliver it to them so they can participate in our class. Firewalls are an issue. That those Chinese students trying to access your Google Doc. This is an issue. Have you designed with this in mind as a teacher? And finally, course design. Have you considered and balanced the benefits of synchronous versus asynchronous learning? Have you chunked? Have you done micro-learning? Have you looked at the 2-hour online lecture that you usually do and said, you know what, I can break this up into 10-minute chunks and give a small exercise after each so students can feel that they have learned something and they have that little benchmark to say, yes, I've gone this much further forward. And finally, how multimedia or multimodal are we? Are we just giving a picture and hoping that explains with 1,000 words? Are we doing that with text? Are we doing that with audio? Because we can. And ultimately, this led together to form Silk, talking about student support, instructor support, the limits of tech, and the course design. Now, the way we built Silk is quite interesting. We took the best of all. So what we've done is we have a simple 3-column system. In the leftmost column, we have our probing question. So what you would address here, for example, we have something from the limits of tech section. So in this section, we have a major question, which you can fill in the blank with any technology you want. So in terms of accessibility for students, there is an impact of learning with the introduction of VoiceThread, Zoom, Google Groups, whatever it is. Now, in the center section, we have a Likert scale done with radio buttons. And so you can select what happened. You can look at this either through, let's say, the metrics of your students' scores or your feedback from your students. Hey, we found out that Zoom has a strong positive impact. Highlight that, so now you know. Now, the final column is the deeper thought questions, the probing questions, the questions that let you reconsider the technology. So here's a question. For example, is the technology being used consistently throughout your class? or is it used as a one-off for just one assignment? So we're only using VoiceThread for this one assignment in my class and never touching it again. Does that make it useful? Would it, because don't forget, your students had to learn that technology to do that assignment, and that's extra work, that's cognitive load. So are you using this technology consistently? Is there value to it? Another thing you could consider is, will this technology be relevant for students later on in their careers? For example, could you be using Microsoft Teams in your classes, which will make them or give these students an advantage when it goes to going into careers, saying that, yes, I'm quite familiar with using Microsoft Teams. Does the work or does the technology make collaboration easier? Because we are looking for collaboration. People are in isolation all the time. We need to get that collaboration back in. Another section that we have is our section for pedagogy, and this is in course design. So for example, when designing or assessing materials, my current pedagogical model is, and I've given some examples here. Now, let's say you are a cooperative, you like cooperative learning. So here's a question. Does the technology you have selected allow for cooperative learning? Is the pedagogical style congruous or incongruous with the technology? So is a discussion board as effective to cooperative learning as, let's say, I don't know, Google Groups, or breakout rooms, or something else that could be used? Have you looked at redesigning any of your assessments? This assessment is an essay. Could we do this essay online? Okay. Traditionally, we do in-class presentations. Could that presentation be done online? Should it be done with Zoom? Should it be done with something else? Should we be teaching them to use Prezi? These are questions you can ask yourself. And right now, I'm proud to say that we have quite a few institutions in Canada that are trialing Silk. We have New Brunswick Community Colleges. They're trialing Silk throughout their entire online curriculum. Dalhousie University is also trialing it with their ESL program. I don't think Athabasca's, I'm trying to remember all of them. We have the Edmonton District School Board in Alberta, and their ESL division was trialing it for a while. They finished and decided not to go forward with it. LINC Alberta. LINC is our ESL learner program in Canada, basically English for immigrants. And they've been having to do online learning, so they're trialing it over there. And I believe York University's, or Seneca College at York University is also trialing it at the moment. And this is what we're looking to do. If you are interested in getting a full copy of Silk, I am more than happy to share it with you. We're looking for people to trial Silk. We want to see what works, what doesn't work. We want feedback. We want to make this an assessment rubric that can help people create better classes for students. And that's it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Awesome presentation. Thanks. If there's any questions, we've got, I think, about 2-3 minutes before the other session with the wrap up. So if you have questions, feel free to type it there in chat or let us know and we can get you unmuted. Let me go and put your email in the chat.
I'll put my email in chat right now.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, the one question I had was how can we get a copy? And you've already answered that one.
There you go. Just please email me in private. I just like to kind of keep all the Silk stuff together so I can just mass mail people periodically saying, how have you been doing with Silk? What's been working well? What hasn't been working well?
So I think at the beginning, I'll just ask a question while we're waiting for other people to maybe type something. It sounds like this is mainly for education or school districts or, schools. Have you tried it with like higher ed or even corporations?
Well, in fact, if higher ed is where we initially designed this for. This was designed for university course offerings. So my partner, Brittany Hacht, was working with University of Saskatchewan. We use this to evaluate their Sir TESOL program there. I trialed it at Trent University. We put it through the program for our Foundations for University Level 1 ESL program. We saw how that came out, and it turned out quite well because they're using a very strong reliance on synchronous online learning, which is important for language learning. But there's no reason, and as I said, that's why other universities are trying it out now. There's no reason it can't be used for any university course.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Now, could that also work backwards towards high school? Yes. And in fairness, I would say that the closer your institution is to post-secondary level education, the more effective or relevant this is. The further away you go from university level education, so for example, if you went down to like grade schools, it does start to fail a little bit. For example, some of our sections that we had there are, do students have communication channels to their institutions? So for like institutional support. So here's the thing. While it's perfectly possible for a university student to call a department or call a professor or email a professor or email the university itself, it is less likely that a 10-year-old child in grade school will necessarily call their teacher. They might email them, but of course, their writing skills are much lower.
Okay, great.
It is more likely their parents would take that. Yeah.
True. Yeah, so it's 2:00. Most people, it looks like we still have 2 attendees. But yeah, thanks for your presentation. It was awesome. I find it interesting. I'll have to pop you an email and get a copy and try it in my evening classes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, moving on to the award winners and the wrap up in another session, which is getting started. So
okay,
thanks again for the presentation.
Everyone. All right.
Yeah,
Have a wonderful day.